Thank you so much, Leslie. And thank you, Blake, for that picture. I don't know why it makes me laugh a little bit. Oh, yeah, I see, showing off now. I see. That reminds me of a church by my house where my parents live, and a friend of mine likes to bring me to sometimes. It's an evangelical church, and the first 25 minutes is just rock and roll praise band music, and then the last 45 minutes is just the pastor talking. That's it. That's the whole church service. I don't know, friends. Watch out. You got to watch me. We might start going there. This month we're talking about prayer. You may have noticed in the service. Also, we're just getting deeper and looking at what that means for folks. Last week we talked about some of the elements of prayer, the call that we might have to pray or that we might hear, the answer that we might give to that call or that we might hope for from our prayers, and also the actions that sometimes we undertake that can either feel like prayer and we heard about this some in Dr. Michelle's wonderful story, or the actions we may feel called to take. And that's one way to pray. It's we talk about it, we talk out loud, but we're going to talk today about other kinds of prayer, other ways of looking at this idea. It's not the only way to pray because, in our reading today from Bill by Kenny Wiley, we heard about when the author goes to church. And he goes to church to get right, to feel better, to just kind of be at church. And I didn't really plan on talking about this, but when I was listening to the story, I was remembering this time where I had I lived in New York City at the time, so you wore jackets to church. It was a very strange place. So I had a blazer on and my button-up shirt. Actually, I'm wearing a button shirt today. My khakis, and I was sitting there in church. And I was just sitting there in the pew, and I don't mean to be, sad or dramatic about it, but I was crying. I was crying because just 20 minutes earlier, my relationship of 3 years ended, and I went to church. I wanted to throw someone out the window of our 10th floor apartment, and instead, I went to church, and it was much better for both of us. And that was a moment for me. That was a turning point when I realized that no matter what happens, for me at least, I was in a place I had come in my life where when I didn't know what to do, when I didn't know what to say, when I didn't know where to go, I went to church. And in that case, going to church meant a building you could look at it that way, a building with a steeple and that they've been working on for 20 years, like any good church, always working on the building. But it wasn't the building. I didn't go to sit in a building. Heaven knows I didn't go to sit in a pew with a hard wooden back. Because I went to be with the people. I went to hear the music like Leslie offers us, like Dennis offers us, and to be with the people that we're here with today. That's what going to church meant for me. I had to go to get right. Now, there's a wide variety of ways to pray, of ways to understand in our faith. The wind is blowing so much in the sanctuary, there's literally face masks flying all over the place. And one of the things we talk about in Unitarian Universalism a lot are the 8 principles that this church observes. They're on our wall, they're on our entryway. One of the things we don't talk about that much are the sources of Unitarian Universalism. A lot of times in my sermons I'll mention 1 or 2, but we're going to mention all 6 today. You ready? These are the sources from which we draw wisdom, truth, inspiration. First is direct experience with the world around us, our own lived perception of what we see. We also draw from the lives of prophetic persons, of all different kinds of people, of scientists, of people of faith, of our family, of our friends. The lives of these prophetic people inform the way we live. Next, we draw from the world religions. And that's through all time, all the ways, all the beautiful ways that people worship around the world we draw from. We draw from the Jewish and Christian teachings. This one's fun. It's our fourth source, And it also adds, to the extent those teachings teach us to love one another as ourselves. Because a little qualification. Not everything in those teachings are what you're going to be hearing from this pulpit. And next, humanism and the teachings of science that teach us not to over-idolatrize our own individual thoughts. So when you think about direct experience, you also temper that, which is number one, with the teachings of science and humanism that maybe help us get beyond just our own feelings about the world. And then last, in the most recent edition, is the earth-centered traditions, which tie us into all the ways that this beautiful earth, and especially some of the earliest, most beautiful primal religions of the world, the cosmologies of the world, tie us into this world we inhabit. Indeed, I would say almost all religions today share some kind of link to these earliest cosmologies, these earth-centered traditions. And these are really only some of the sources of our faith. We pull from them, we draw from them, all this word. But are these all that they are? Are these all the only way that we think? Just these 6 things? Have we covered everything? Whenever a minister asks a rhetorical question, it's usually no, is the answer. There's so many other ways, just these 6. Once you make a list of anything, you can, just from basic symbolic logic, that'll tell you there's probably more you left out. So there's other ways also that we pull and we draw and we take into our life wisdom and ways of inspiration. But just say we're doing all this pulling, we're doing all this drawing, we're doing all this. Then what? See, Unitarian Universalism doesn't have an end game. There isn't a set of documents, there isn't a set of beliefs, there isn't a set of dogma that you can sort of play in the sandbox. And a lot of theologies, once you get out of the sandbox, well, you're not talking about the theology anymore, so you like broke the rules of the game. We don't have a set way of thinking, of believing, and so you can never leave the sandbox. We're just one big sandbox of people to play in. But one of the ways Unitarian Universalists historically have gotten into some trouble is this idea that if we can draw from everything, then everything's ours to do with whatever we want. And that can cause some problems. I have some friends who they wonder a little bit about some of our predominantly white churches singing songs like "No More Auction Block for Me," that is in our hymnal. I can tell you, some of my friends of color, that does not sit well with them. So there's some ways we've gained a lot, and there's some ways we've really fallen short in how we express our faith. This taking of others. Of course, taking art from other cultures, of marginalized cultures, is something dominant cultures have been doing for millennia. But that's another sermon. But it raises this question. If we're always taking, if we're always drawing, if our faith is based on new ways of taking, new ways of drawing, when are we ever going to be done? When is it enough? When have we taken, drawn enough? As I've said, there's really no end game for Unitarian Universalism. So you start to say, like, what are we building? Are we just going to, like, fill our whole worldwide sandbox with every prayer and every thought and every song and just say this is ours and we're going to do with it what we want? When is it enough? Robert Keegan is a writer, and he wrote a work called Immunity to Change. And in that work, he asks these 3 fundamental questions that every faith tries to answer. He calls these the 3 big assumptions. The first question is, will I be loved? The second one is, will I be alone? And the third is, will I be enough? When is it enough? I think about that time in my blue blazer and my plaid polo, sitting there in that pew, singing Spirit of Life. We didn't sing it in Hawaiian there. And wondering, when will I be loved? Will I be alone? Was I enough? As he just slept. Life sends us enough messages about these three things, about whether we're loved, whether we're alone, whether we are enough. Do we really need a faith that starts to make us ask those questions too? Does our faith send people the message that they may not be enough? Does having just a high school education or just a bachelor's degree in some communities tell them that maybe that person isn't enough? Does the amount someone make, the amount someone earns, make them question whether they are enough in a faith community? Kenny Wiley shares such a beautiful way of thinking. No matter what it is, no matter what it is, no matter what it is, you are enough. And he says, my God tells me I am enough. My God tells me we are enough. That personal relationship. This is exactly what he says. Whoever you are enough. Whomever you love, a grammarian after my own heart. Whomever you love, you are enough. Whatever your race or ethnicity, you are enough. Whatever your abilities, you are enough. Whatever your economic class, you are enough. Whatever your gender identity, you are enough. Whatever you do for a living, you are enough. If you don't have a job right now, like so much, this is me editorializing, of this nation, you are enough. You are a human being, so you are enough. And he writes it with an exclamation point. See, the thing about prayer, ultimately, prayer is humility. It is saying, I don't got this right now. Some people look at pride as taking credit for things we had nothing to do with. Being proud of blue eyes, or proud of height, or not liking someone's height. Someone else, genetics, God, whatever you say, had something to do with that. And feeling bad about that or taking credit for it, that's pride. And humility is saying, yeah, accepting that. And one thing of prayer, one thing that we get to in this sense of prayer is acceptance of those things. Acceptance that I don't have this right now, that I might, need something more in church. I might ask for something else. And there's a long history of prayer that is born out of feeling like I am not enough alone. And they're beautiful prayers. As much as there's a part of me that wants to say, oh, those prayers are wrong because you're enough. But there's a song, Fix Me Jesus, from the Black tradition that is heartbreaking and beautiful. One of my favorite prayers that every minister prays at the end of every board meeting, bless them, change me. I'm just kidding. I love our board of directors. But there's this idea of if there's something wrong in me, change me. That they're fine, bless them, change me. And then an old one from Psalm 121, I think. From whence cometh my help? All these old prayers, these ways of thinking, are acknowledging in some way that we might not be enough alone. So we're left with this juxtaposition. You're enough, you're enough, you're enough. Am I enough? Am I enough? Am I enough? See, ultimately, prayer at its root is being oneself in the presence of the divine. If myself is calling and asking questions, if myself is wondering what's going on, if myself is dancing to 80s synth pop in my kitchen, not that I'd ever do that every day, but most days, then that is prayer too. You better believe dance is prayer. There's an old saying, I love this, and I know I've said it before. The great master, the great teacher, gathered all his students together after a course in prayer. And he said to them all, he said, sit down. He said, we've all learned how to say prayers. And they said, yes, yes, yes. And he asked everyone to stand up, and as they're walking through town square, he says, and we've all learned how to listen to prayers. Oh, yes, 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 master. Very good, very good. We've learned how to do that. As they walk through the doors of a building, he says, we've even learned how to write prayers. And they said, yes, oh yes, we're very good at writing prayers, Master. And they all took their seats. And now, he said, we are going to see a prayer. At that moment, the curtain rose and the ballet began. That dance, that movement, that ways of being in our world is prayer. C.S. Lewis, the writer of Mere Christianity and Surprised by Joy, two books that, if you're kind of wondering about what C.S. Lewis thought about faith, not just what he thought about a lion, a witch, and a wardrobe, are maybe worth a read. But in Surprised by Joy, he talks about the three pathways he found to faith. The first was nature, being around in nature and the beauty of a countryside. Heaven knows we live in a place, many of us, where you don't have to look very far to feel close to the divine on this island. The second is beauty, the being near art, music, ways that inspire this closeness to the divine. And the third he mentions is friendship, the deepness of soul friendship, of soul bonding. And he acknowledges in the book that that is a luxury sometimes that not everyone has, but that for him those are the three ways he sees his closeness to the divine, his bridge to those. And at times, I do wonder about our faith. I wonder if being influenced so much by this Enlightenment period in the United States, and whether that carries an ideal of that movement of fixing, perfecting, and being right, of finding just the right mix of just the right hymns every Sunday, just the right balance of prayers versus reflections, of good balance of all the 6 sources that we've named and all the 8 principles, so the recipe is just right in our faith. I wonder if millennia of prayer tells me anything at all sometimes. But if it does, it tells me this. I can't get right at church if I am so busy trying to be right. One of the key cornerstones of humility is letting go, perhaps, of being right. I can't get right if I'm too busy being right. Prayer is being yourself in the presence of the divine, and you, all of us, are enough here. We are all broken, battered, cobbled together, and doing just about the best we can on any given day, dragging ourselves to church sometimes, trying to hold it together or just letting ourselves go. And we are enough here. We are wanderers on the path of faith, the journey of life, stopping by here for a while, and we are enough here. And whether we say amen or amama, aloha or alleluia, whether we are silent or whether we sing songs to the rafters, there is no prayer anywhere, no source so sure or sweet, no words so magic or true as me just being me and you just being you. So that in the presence of all that is holy, we can be only, we can be just, we can be simply all that we are.